knowing not it's you they call. Some through mists of their unknowing, bruised and hurting when they fall, turn away, but who can lead you? You, the mother of us all. If the child forsake its mother, will she coldly turn away? Wise or foolish, we're your children. Guide us, Mother, if we stray. Those whose hearts are torn with anguish lack the power your name to call. Heal their wounds, Ma, soothe their sorrows. You, the mother of us all your children, Mother, call you, knowing not it's you they call. Some through mists of their unknowing, bruised and hurting when they fall, turn away, but who can lead you? You, the mother of us all. If the child forsake its mother, will she coldly turn away? Wise or foolish, we're your children. Guide us, Mother, if we stray. Those whose hearts are torn with anguish lack the power your name to call. Heal their wounds, Ma, soothe their sorrows. You, the mother of us all. Heal their wounds, Ma, soothe their sorrows. You, the mother of us all. 'Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach my heart to impart everywhere your delight. Sing of moon rays on the rain, sing that love's not in vain. Every grief, every wrong has its ending in song. Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach all men how to spin clouds of gloom into light. Without silence, what is song? Without night, where is dawn? Were it not for men's woes, who would smile at a rose? Nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Let each tone silence groan, earth and heaven unite. Morning laughter, evening tears, snow and blossoms all fade. Boy must sing through the night to face change unafraid. Sing with me the first verse. Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach my heart to impart everywhere your delight. Sing of moon rays on the rain, sing that love's not in vain. Every grief, every wrong has its ending in song. Nightingale, nightingale, nightingale.
Just have a few minutes of silence. Thank you.
I'm so happy about this temple. Just thrills me to be here. It just really has a future. It has a present and it has a future. You can just really feel it. It's very, very happy. It's very happiness producing. It was very dear to Swamiji, as all of you know, to have a center in Los Angeles. Narayani was reminding me, it's one of the few centers. He devoted more time to trying to build this center really than any other except the whole country of India. He did go to San Francisco, but he was only there for the summer. And he spent 3 months. He spent much longer than that here. It's been a tough nut to crack, so to speak. But I think we've been digging the basement to get the foundation, but now I think we're at ground level and we'll go up. And it feels that way. The whole weekend has been on the subject of courage, calmness, fear, living fearlessly. Last night I was in the South Bay Center, and the topic last night was living fearlessly, which seemed a little more than my portfolio, as I was saying this afternoon. Reducing perhaps, but without seemed a lot. And this morning I did the same subject, so tonight we have it yet again. And I know Swami traveled the country on the topic of the practice of joy and had to give 32 talks on the topic. Did he do the same topic the second tour also, Ram? Was it the same? Yeah, he just, day after day, had to give, we called them the joy tours both times, the practice of joy, in city after city, exactly the same topic. Seemed like a good idea at the time. I don't know if he grew to curse us after a while. It was to save, I don't know, it just seemed like a good idea at the time. That's all I can say. But I'm not him. So I was trying to think tonight, how can we pick this up from an entirely different string? When I first discovered the teachings of self-realization, my first connection was not with this line of masters, but it was with Swami Vivekananda and Swami Paramahansa Ramakrishna. Not directly. Actually, I was living in Los Angeles. I forget that I ever lived in Los Angeles, in Westwood Village. And a friend, right somewhere over there. I don't know where it is. I still don't know where I am. But it was here. And someone handed me a book by Vivekananda, who is a very intellectual, intelligent writer. He was a very great saint, but he wrote in a very intellectual way, so I resonated. And I just remember opening the book or reading some section of it. I was 19, and there were 3 phrases that completely turned my head around. One of them was, what you experience today is the result of what you did yesterday. What you experience tomorrow is what you're doing today. That's the law of karma. It said, don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. Which my response to that was, well, what else do you think about? It was just like, I wasn't selfish, but I was self-concerned. I was always calculating my own position and trying to better it. And I don't mean that in an ambitious way, or I just always wanted to have as most fun I could have. And so I would calculate everything in terms of how much I would enjoy it, and if I would enjoy something else more, I would move off to that. So I was a little flaky, because I could never quite be relied upon, because if I got a better offer, I'd just take it. But then the one that's relevant for tonight, I didn't realize it was a quote from the Bible, but it is, perfect love casts out all fear. And that was really, I was raised Jewish, so I'd never read the New Testament. And it was just like, what a interesting idea. I really didn't know myself well enough to know how nervous I was as a person, but I had figured out in my own mind that the most useless emotion, the only, to my mind, utterly useless emotion was fear. And this was just, the wisdom of somebody who's 17, but I knew I was standing by it. And so I had that in my head, that fear was this enormous obstacle to be overcome. And then here was Vivekananda telling me what the antidote was to it. Of course, I didn't understand it. I still don't, but I understand it better than I did then. But those three ideas, I really remember thinking, it was the first time in my entire life that anybody had told me something that was both true and useful. I'd been just looking for useful truth. Nobody told me anything useful. Just, the capital of this place and the main products of that place and, that sort of thing. But just nothing that actually was going to change my experience of life. And I had such a strong feeling that the experience of my life, I had to get a grip on it somewhere. And it wasn't that I wasn't willing to get a grip on it, I just didn't know where the handles were. And Vivekananda offered me those three thoughts, and that was the beginning. And I studied 1920, I was 22 when I met Swami, so I always say it was 5 years, but I guess it was only 3, that I was really dedicated to Ramakrishna. Here, I would go up to the Hollywood Temple. Just as a by the way, before I met Swami, I met another saintly man, but he was of such a different type, I had no way of following him. He was a Swami of the Ramakrishna order, and he came to speak at the Hollywood Temple, which is up in the hills. I'll point into some random direction. Yeah, he was up there, and he had an Indian accent. The world was much less mixed up in 1968 or 67. So I don't think I'd ever heard anybody speak English with an Indian accent at all. And so he came and he was speaking there, except actually probably some of the other Swamis. He was speaking there, and because of his accent, I could only understand part of what he said. But he stood and he lectured to us. And as far as I know, there wasn't a single linear thought in his lecture. I mean, there was no philosophical dissertation, no Vivekananda-esque discussion of things. He was just more or less randomly stringing ideas together without any particular coherence. And the more he talked, the more and more joyous I felt. And for me, being an intellectual person, this was a very unusual experience. But I guess I had it in me because I could feel it. And then afterwards, he was greeting people in the line, and I remember greeting him, and he had a look in his eyes like I had never seen before. And he probably didn't shake our hands because he was a monk. He probably just pronomed. But we greeted each other, and he had a look in his eye, and he also looked right at me, but I was conscious of the fact that whatever he was seeing when he looked at me was not what I saw when I looked in the mirror. That somehow he was just looking at something completely other. And I'd never forgotten it, 1968 or 67. It's just vivid in my mind. I can still see that man's eyes. I have no idea who he was, and I never saw him again. Amazing, isn't it? But he was living somewhere else. And very, very joyful. Very joyful. Now, I had an experience once, and this was one of those split seconds. I wouldn't call it a moment in eternity. It was a second in eternity. It really didn't last long. I was feeling in my life a little anxious about who knows what. Just work I had to do. Would I be able to do it? Did I have enough time? What was going to happen to this person? What about these bills that were due? Whatever it was, just the normal. This was long after I was at Ananda. And I was conscious of the fact that I was allowing those conditions of my life to create within me a certain amount of tension. And then I thought in that moment of Master. And I thought of his, absolute unity with everything. And his perspective, however I could understand that, what does a master have to be afraid of? Think about that. Think of the long list of things that we're always so afraid of. What does he have to be afraid of? What in this universe could possibly frighten him? He's not afraid of physical. He doesn't have a physical pain. He doesn't care about his reputation. He's not attached to anybody. He's not desiring something to happen that isn't in the will of God to happen. I mean, just the long list of everything. He doesn't have financial worries. He's not really worried about getting old. It's just, there's nothing. What would he be afraid of? And I could feel not only my little conscious worries, but all of as I was talking earlier today, all the subconscious levels of anxiety that is, I consider normal. And for just a second, I was actually walking up the stairs, and sort of like between step 3 and step 4. It was like I felt what it would be like to be absolutely free of fear. And it was, of course, beyond imagination of expectancy. To be so at peace with the world that nothing could shake you from that equanimity. And then, of course, everything rushed back and I just went back on. But we're fish swimming in water and we think this is normal. We consider the sort of state of semi-tension to be just normal because we think of ourselves as being separate from the universe around us. And in that separateness, there's naturally this extraordinary sense of vulnerability. Earlier today, we were having a question and answer discussion. It was you who asked, what is Mother Earth trying to tell us with all of the disrupted weather and all of that stuff? I think she's trying to tell us that you people are expendable. I was here long before you and I'll be here long after you. Don't even think about it. You're just in Swami's book, The Tunnel, which is his children's story. That was I was talking to him after he wrote that, and I said, that must have been so much fun to write, because you could just explain things according to your intuition without having to give it the slightest justification. And in fact, I was listening to him on something talk that he was giving. Oh, I know, he was giving a talk at the conference they had at Ananda Village, all these different experts on the yugas. And Swami gave a talk, and there was a man who spoke about Egypt, and what this man had researched and figured out about how the pyramids were really built and what the society was built like. And Swami mentioned that in the time tunnel, he'd come up with exactly the same theories, based on nothing except his perception of what it must have been like. And then I said, it must have been very relaxing for you just to be able to pull these ideas out of the air and then just write them, because it was fiction like this. And one of the parts that I loved was for future ages, where you didn't have to have any screens or glass in your windows, because we were in such harmony with the world that the insects would stay in their part and we would stay in our part. And we just didn't need to be sort of blocking each other off. We just all agreed, that's your world, this is mine. So we'll live here. In our community, we acquired a farm about 2 years ago, right after Swami died. This land came to us, which we purchased. And it had been a flower farm, and now it was a vegetable farm, and all of a sudden we were in relationship with all the critters. The rabbits, the gophers, the foxes, the ones that want the chickens, the ones that want the broccoli, just the whole crowd. And we were trying to just sort out how we do this and hoping, to create some harmony, but the people who lived in that kind of harmony really lived in it completely. They, like the American Indians, they didn't live in houses. They were so in tune with the whole thing, so they could get the animals to cooperate with them. We can't exactly drive up in our cars, push the little button to click it in, talk on our cell phones, and then ask the deer to stay out of the broccoli. It's just too many forces at work. And this is just random stories, then I'll get to my point. We also, in our community, we had a lot of fruit trees, have a lot of fruit trees and some nut trees and so on, and we also had gazillions of squirrels. And so we were just conscientiously growing all this food for the squirrels. And it was annoying. We were trying to find benign ways of dealing with them. And we got one of those little sound ray things that's supposed to stop them. So I put the little sound ray thing up on the fence like this. And then we put all these seeds in the middle. And then we watch the squirrels come and get the seeds and walk up to the sound things and look at them and smell them, Just totally useless. They were just interested in them, maybe even they liked them. It had no effect. So what we actually said is we need a predator. And darned if a hawk didn't move in. And we've had a hawk ever since and not very many squirrels. Which, maybe it's, if I was in charge of the squirrels, I might feel badly, but I thought it was a really nice arrangement. So now the hawk and his babies are living well, and we're living better, and the squirrels are living less. So there you have the whole story. It all sort of works the way it's supposed to work. I remember watching a documentary, and I don't remember what the object of the documentary was, whether it was the seals or the polar bears or the birds, whatever it was. But you were super invested in one of the creatures. And so when the other creature, in order to live, had to eat the babies of the creature that you were super invested in, you really felt like something awful had happened. Of course, if the whole thing had been run from the side of that predator, you would be really glad when he ate the little baby birds, because then that would mean he would get to keep going. And it would just depend on which deva you were, who you were assigned to. But in fact, they all work it together, because everything on this planet is always working together. And some people are totally freaked out by the natural world. There was a film called Migration, which is a documentary about birds going everywhere. And it opens, unbelievably, it opens in some nest, and you have all these little tiny blind little birds in there. They're just, little like this. And then there's one behemoth of a bird, also a blind fledgling, that apparently some very irresponsible mother just leaves her egg in there, and when it hatches, it's twice as big as the natural habitats there. This is the way it works. And then, this is what you're watching, this big blind bird pushes the others off out of the nest. Just knocks them out of the nest and then gets all the food himself. Right. I thought to myself, oh, it starts so early. And then we get to be people and we still hate each other because you were the big behemoth who came in my nest and just pushed me out. And on a certain level, it all seems so unkind. But it's all just going through what it has to go through. Because we inhabit bodies for as long as they serve us, and we are not these temporary physical forms. They come and go like that, come and go just like this. When Bella died, Bella Bingham, she was then, at that time, Bella Potopaskaya, she died of cancer. And she was talking to a friend of mine. I wasn't there. I wasn't that close to her at that time. And she was lying there, and she was days away from dying. She knew that there was nothing that could be done, and she just kind of made a hospice agreement about how much intervention there would be, and so she knew just approximately how much time she had. And her friend was talking to her about the fact that she was leaving behind a husband and a home and everything. She was very detached. And she said she was lying there, and she saw thousands of faces go by in front of her, and she realized that every one of them had been hers in one life or another. And so, she was saying it was extremely difficult to be concerned about the loss of the one she was wearing, because having seen so many go by, like, to which one do you cling? And there's Swamiji writes in the Art and Science of Raja Yoga about reincarnation, that we incarnate into a form that has the capacity to express as much consciousness as we were able to bring. You might say as much conscious awareness as we were able to bring. So a clam that's underwater and that's rooted to a rock has very few options. You know, it's alive, but it just has to open its little mouth and hope that something floats by that's interesting. It can't, even like a monkey, take a bite of apple, a bite of banana, a bite of something else, and just keep moving around, as they say that monkeys do for no reason at all except they get bored and they just want something else. I mean, a monkey at least can choose his food. The clam just has to open his mouth and hope that something delectable comes by. And you can see that the capacity for awareness and experience in a clam is rather limited, which is why Swami always jokes about happy as a clam is not very happy, because that you can't do much. But you're a clam until your potential for awakening is too big to be a clam anymore, at which point your clam body goes away. Somebody harvests you and eats you, perhaps, or a bird or something, and then you get to be, a snail this time. Whoa, you're going to get to be as big as a snail. There's a great joke I love. A snail gets a ride on the back of a turtle, and the snail is there with the antenna out, and it's going, whee! It's all relative. But it's not different for us. No, we choose the body of a man or a woman of whatever nationality, whatever opportunities, privileges, lack of privilege, support, lack of support we need in order to be able to push the limits of our awakening to the edge. And at the point at which that physical body no longer serves the cause of your awakening, you just let it go as casually as taking off your shoes when we come into the building here. And yet, because we don't remember all those thousands of faces, we're always worried about something. And because somebody asked a Buddhist monk, I'm not sure who, about reincarnation, and he said, you think of it as separate events. There's this life, and then there's this life, and then there's this life. He said, it's just one unbroken flow of energy. Even all the way back, as Master said, to being a diamond. It's just one unbroken flow of energy in which each time we express the form that allows us to express our awakening. And if we have greatly misused an incarnation and squandered the potential for awakening, then sometimes we have to go back to something that doesn't have that much potential. This is how Master described you get thrown back to the animal level. He said, but usually for only one incarnation, because it's a sufficient wake-up call, so to speak, that you're more willing. But he said you could get thrown back to the level of a germ. And Swami just try to picture it for a minute. Being a germ with some subconscious awareness. Think about the lack of scope that a germ has. And everybody hates you. Really. They're trying as hard as they can to obliterate you. Talk about a nerve-wracking incarnation. But that's the most that you have, and you just have to live like that. So where I was going with all of this is the entire cause for all of our fears and lack of confidence is because we're not conscious of the love nature of both our lives and the whole universe around us. And the core answer to all of this is cultivating more divine love within our hearts. And cultivating a much more conscious relationship with that power that's being showered on us all the time. Many of you, or at least some of you, were at Ananda Village this last weekend when we dedicated the Moksha Mandir of Swamiji. And then a few days later, just this week, it was his birthday, the 19th of May. So we, again, in our temple had a ceremony. I presume you had one here. Everybody was celebrating his birthday. His birthday felt like his death anniversary because we had just dedicated the temple. It was really hard to feel birthday-ish about it. It was much more like Moksha Day repeated a month later from his actual Moksha Day. And in our temple, Shanti decided to show Swami's Easter service from 2013, the year he passed, even though it was in Italian with subtitles, but it was very well subtitled, because that was the last public lecture he gave. It was, I believe, like March 31st, and he left his body on April 21st. So there were several weeks, but he never did another public talk. It's a very moving talk, and I encourage you to listen to it. But it was so touching at the end. By the end of his life, in the early years of Swami's life, he rarely allowed much emotion or feeling to come out from him. He just was always, he wasn't controlled like this. He just was in a different bhav, is the only way I can think of it. And so it was extremely unusual for him to tear up or to have his voice break or anything like that. The last decade of his life, he would just say, "My guru," and then he would just be gone. And he'd have to recover before he could go forward. And he also, in the early part of his life, he rarely referred to his own inner state of consciousness. And at the end of his life, he was just always talking about bliss. And about just bliss that and almost as he would say, he just didn't know what to do with himself. There was so much, and what would he do? So the very last line of that talk was that quote from the Curé d'Ars of France, where he said, "If you knew how much God loves you, you would die for joy." And it took him quite a bit longer to say that than it just took me, because he kept losing the capacity to finish the sentence. And he was just looking into, you could just see it and feel it. He was looking at this crowd of people in the room, and, well, on many levels, I think he was seeing how much God loved us, feeling it in himself and seeing it in everyone there. And there was another, and I may be projecting all of this, but there was truth in it also. He was, on some level, pleading with us. Just don't suffer. There's no need to suffer. If you knew how much God loves you, you would die for joy. And that was the last line of his talk. Of his last formal talk on this planet as Swami Kriyananda, that's the last thing he said. And then the talk was over, and then the next thing he said was also absolutely perfect. It was the Sunday service, it was Easter, and he gave the sermon, but he wasn't going to do the festival and stay for the rest of the service. So after he finishes that, he just says, "I'm not able to stay, but you all just carry on." And then Shurjo and Narayani walked up, and as they helped him from his seat, he said, "Thank you." And that's how the film ends, just with those words, all in Italian, but just beautiful. What could be better? Just in every way. Because when we allow it, we realize that this whole story is knit together. It's being woven together. The warp, the warp and the woof, whichever is which. The way the strands work. That there's this extraordinary picture that's always being made, but we're thinking so much of the time about something else. And we're so much of the time just looking at some little edge of it that we just don't realize where this picture is going. There's a certain kind of painting, I can't remember, it might be Pointel or something like that, lots of little dots. When you walk up to it, it's just a maze of dots, but when you step way back, you see all those tiny little points are all knit together in some extraordinary, often really extraordinarily beautiful picture that could not be created except in that peculiar form. And so I think about what a mind the artist must have to be able to see it both close up as he's putting the dots and also realize where that is going. I don't have any of that kind of skill myself, so to me it's even more of a mystery. But that's what we're working with every day. We're working with a minute at a time, just making one decision and taking one step. But what we do is we lose track of the fact that a picture is being woven all around us. And the picture that's being woven all around us is really the picture of divine love. We can't breathe, we can't have our lives at all except that God has enabled us to. We need to become sometimes very, very simple about this and not get too lost in all of our complicated ideas. Today, earlier, someone asked about discipleship, and I spoke of it in terms of it being a central characteristic of the message that Master brought, because at this time what we need to understand is the limits of our personal power until that power is connected to divine power. And we got plenty of pride. What we need is a little humility here. But another absolutely essential thread that Master is bringing here is the concept of God as Divine Mother. And it's a very important one for us to understand as representatives of Master, but it's also a very important one for us to understand as individual devotees. When Jesus incarnated, you understand that every single master, they all have exactly the same consciousness. If you're infinite and you have no karma, you all have to be talking from the same place. You don't have a whole series of parallel infinities out there, or absolute states of God realization. So all the masters on this wall and all the true masters, not merely advanced souls, but free souls who come back as avatars, they all speak from the same level. But as soon as they incarnate into a physical body, their capacity to deliver their message becomes contained by the culture into which they have incarnated, and therefore the mass capacity to understand what they're saying, and the karma of the disciples they've come to serve. So all variations on what they're saying are based on their position in the flow of history and their relationship to their own devotees. So when Jesus came, he was the avatar to the Jewish people. And, the history has grown up, where the Jews were against Jesus and had him crucified. But the fact of the matter is everybody in the story was a Jew, because nobody else was that interested in what was going on. It was all Jews in all sides of every question, because they were the remnant of Sanatana Dharma at that time. I mean, everything else was pagan, which is that they didn't understand the true nature of reality, whereas Judaism still did. But Judaism was divided between the corrupt priesthood and the true devotees. And it was the true devotees who'd called Jesus, and the hope was that they could restore Judaism to what it was supposed to be, just as Swami has made such a valiant effort to restore Christianity to Sanatana Dharma. He had us going out incognito performing the oratorio in Christian churches, with our English names, just kind of pretending we were just any other Christians, hoping to re-inspire the churches with true intercommunion, the movement of intercommunion. The effort fizzled, and Swamiji afterwards essentially said, "I knew it would, but it was worth a try." So he put it, and then he said, he didn't really mean it as cynically as it sounded. He said, "They have all that wonderful real estate." He said, "It would just be easier if we could convert them." But he said it wasn't meant to be. But Jesus had the same intention. He came to restore Judaism. But in the end, the Jews rejected him, and so Paul had to go out and turn it into Christianity. But it was never Christianity. It was always Judaism until after Jesus was gone. But what was happening was that the only concept of God they had was the judge. And the the interpreters of the judge's edicts was the corrupt priesthood. It was a pretty grim situation. And there were countless laws, and you had to follow every one of them. And if you failed in any one of them, then God would be displeased with you, and it was all over. It was very, very grim. So Jesus came, and that's why Jesus made such a point that God is our Father. And now people are mad because he only spoke of the Father. But at the time, when they were thinking of a harsh judge, he could only speak of the Father. The Father was the next step from the harsh judge. And the Father aspect of the divine is a perfectly valid one. It's the slightly impersonal, wisdom-oriented, slightly distant, but nonetheless holding the beacon of light. I mean, you have to have the masculine. You can't just have feminine. You have to also have masculine. And it was way sweeter than the judge. That's why he said, if you ask of your father a loaf of bread, will he give you a stone? I mean, this is your father. This is your own, your very own. His inheritance is yours. But when Master came, the father is well established. That's where we are now in the Western world. I'm not talking about the East, but his mission was to the West. But now the father's not as close as the mother. And the father is just a little demanding. And so it creates that slight distance. You know what the mother says, just wait until your father comes home, right? You know, the mother is there, but when discipline is required, your father's going to come. And the human world is a tiny, tiny reflection of the divine world. So we still have that picture of the masculine. You have to meet the standard. But what Master wants from us is great intimacy. Because this is the time of personal spirituality. This is not the time of self-realization. He's putting spiritual responsibility in the only place where it can ever be, which is right into our own hands. No priests, no dogmas, no theology, no gotta do this or else you're damned, these are the standards you have to meet or else you're damned. None of that. And what is more intimate than the relationship between a mother and her child? You know, the baby grows under the mother's heart. She gives her very life being for the birth of that child. And after the child is born, is willing to die herself if necessary to keep that child going. And how, you know, just the picture in our own mind, what does mother represent? And what mother represents is that all-forgiving compassion. You know, whether you had that kind of mother or not, but that's what the idea of mother is. You see, Jesus referred to it, but he had to couch it a little bit. He called it the comforter. Isn't that beautiful? That's such a beautiful word. I'll send you the comforter. The little girl said to her mother after she went to Sunday school, Mommy, Mommy, don't worry anymore, the quilt is coming. Mother investigated later, and the lesson had been, of course, on God will send the comforter. But it's so sweet when you think of that also, the comforter. And when you think of the comforter, it's not a question even of whether you deserve to be comforted. It's a question only of whether you need to be comforted. And so what Master was really trying to get us to understand is that is the role that God plays in our life. And it's not that the Father isn't still there, but the biggest obstacle to everything that we do is our fear. That I'm not going to make the standard. I'm not good enough. I'm going to sabotage myself. People aren't really going to like me. How am I going to pay these bills? Will I have enough time? Just make the list. Me going up the stairs. Just really trying to think, what would it be like if there was absolutely nothing that could cause any anxiety? Okay, now how do we get there? We get there by, just think how a little child feels. I had a very sweet relationship. Both my parents were very dear, but I had a particular affinity for my father. My father was a sort of a biggish man. My physique is my mother's, not my father's. And I remember I was driving down the road just yesterday, and I saw this father with about like a 3-year-old girl around his neck. You know how you put on your shoulders. That's the word I'm trying to say. He wasn't wearing her like a boa. He just, she was just sitting on his shoulders, gripping his hair. And of course, a child is really short, and when a child is on top of his father, child is huge. And I so vividly remember riding on my father's shoulders. I remember holding onto his forehead, and just everything. How incredibly protected and safe I felt there. I was lucky in my parents. Just this feeling of what problem could there possibly be? Because here I am, and especially when he would carry me, there was a lot of just a feeling of protection from him, pretending to be asleep in the car so that he would have to carry me in. I'm sure I didn't fool them, but he just did it because I wanted him to. And if you didn't experience it, you can at least long for it and you can imagine it. Now, my father's dead. I grew way too big for him to carry me on his shoulders. His limitations as a person over time became more clear to me, and my unquestioned confidence in his ability to protect me was gradually eroded by the disillusionment that comes as you begin to see that it's just people around you. But that feeling and that longing for it, it's put in our hearts for a reason. And it's put in our hearts because it's a true longing, and it will be fulfilled. But then we have to, as mature individuals, we have to create that. And it's not that we're imagining it. This is a very important aspect of this. We're not imagining it. This is the wonderful thing about meditation. When I would teach meditation, I would explain to people, you're not drifting off into a world of your imagination. You have to use your imagination and your powers of visualization and many other things to project yourself into a reality that we don't live in every day. But when you attune yourself to that vibration is there. So it's like science fiction. The vibration is there, and then you get the mantra just right or the magic words just right, and then all of a sudden you're able to walk through the wall because you've aligned yourself. And so we spend all our time affirming our separate reality and affirming all of the nervousness and unhappiness and potential disappointments that come because we're always affirming the separate reality. And what we have to create for ourselves, or let me say, we have to embrace for ourselves, we have to embrace an understanding of a greater reality, which is simply referred to as God, but a reality greater than our separate individuality that gives us courage, that gives us hope. That it was very interesting because being with Swami Kriyananda, which was a karma that I had to live with for so many, I was able to live through for so many years, but now is also gone for me and all of us in that way. Whenever I was where he was, I never ever wanted to be anywhere else. And it's an interesting thought because a lot of times wherever you are, there's a little piece of you that is thinking about being somewhere else, isn't it? It may not even long to be somewhere else, but it just imagines somewhere else. I'm in Los Angeles and I usually live in Palo Alto. So there's just a piece of me that's somewhere there thinking about what I'm going to do when I get home and how I'm going to do it, or what we're going to have for dinner after this. Or it's just, we're all often divided. But whenever I was wherever Swami Kriyananda was, it didn't matter where it was, that was just it. That was the center of the universe. And it wasn't merely that I enjoyed being with him more than I enjoyed being anywhere else on the planet. It was also, of course, his consciousness. He was just completely settled in wherever he was. When I was talking about his life at one point, I was trying to express something, and I came up with a rather slang way of saying it, but it was the only way I could think of it. In all the circumstances that I knew him, I never saw him rattled. I never saw him move away from his own center, even if he had to be very intense about things or move very quickly. But he never moved out of his own spot. He was just in that relationship to the infinite, and it was within him, and he took that wherever he had to take it. Even if we were very late, he just would never move quickly. Move in a hurried manner. He'd move quickly, but he never looked hurried, like many of us do. And it was just always, whatever it was just going to be the next thing. That's not something that falls upon you. That's something that you practice. You practice always standing in relationship to the fact that God loves us and we're just about to die for joy. Because love, perfect love, casts out all fears. And there's a Haridas who, he lived in Southern California here for a few years, and Haridas is the author of a great many Haridasisms, that's what we call them. There's really no other word for it. But one of his was what he called Spy Dog, solving problems in direction of God. It was an acronym, Spy Dog. Whatever problem you have, you can solve it on many different levels. You know, if you're anxious about your finances, you can make up a budget and stick to it. And it's not that that's a bad idea. If you can't keep track of your money, you should keep track of your money. It's not like you shouldn't be practical. But you should also try to go to the generic solution to all dilemmas, solving every problem by moving closer to God. And whenever we feel anxious about anything or afraid about anything, by definition, we have moved out of our center. Because I was using Swami as the example. When you're standing in your center, you just know that you're exactly where you're supposed to be, and you're playing your part in this great tapestry that's being woven around you. And how could you possibly be anywhere else? At the end of Swami's life, he walked very, very slowly. I'm not even before he had to be supported, but he would walk very slowly. We were on holiday in a resort in India, in Goa, and his room was a few minutes walk from where we would have our meals. And you know, that was a walk I could probably make in a minute, and it would usually take us about 10. And it was partly just his bhav, and because we enjoyed all being together, but we would walk along just about this fast. I mean, that is like never in my life do I go anywhere like that. But we were there for days before I even noticed how slowly we were walking. Because where would I want to be except where God had planted me? Now, the darn thing is, it's always true. I was teasing Dharma Devi, who has so many guests here this weekend that she spent half the day just driving them to one part or another. And Narayan wrote a poem to traffic. What was it? The traffic mantra? Just a poem to the traffic, composed when he was in it. You know, it's an extremely easy place to want to be someplace other than you are, because it so often doesn't cooperate with your intentions and creates an atmosphere around us. But merely because it creates an atmosphere around us, is that a justification for now suddenly breaking the connection and feeling that now I'm not loved, now I'm separated? But we have to, that's a way of life. That's not just something we invoke when we're suddenly in traffic. It's all the time being in company. There was a great mystic, a Christian man named Frank Laubach. He wrote a book called Letters from a Modern Mystic. He was sent to the Philippines to convert them to Christianity and found that they were not interested. So he more or less decided to convert himself to Christianity, which is he decided that this was he was separated from his family in this unusual situation. He actually did a lot of good for the people there too. But he decided to, it was an opportunity to make an ongoing relationship with Jesus. And he has certain books, a minute-by-minute practice of just never feeling separated from Jesus. The parents of a woman who lived at Ananda Village, Catherine Kairavi, her parents were in the same church or whatever that Frank Laubach was, and they were actually also training to be missionaries. And he came to teach them, because he's an older man. I think he's gone now. And they asked him to pray. And they said afterwards that no one had ever prayed like he prayed. He said, most people pray like this. Now I am praying. And here's clearly the beginning, here's the middle, and here's the end of the prayer. They said when Frank Laubach prayed, they felt that he was making audible to others the ongoing conversation he was always having with God, and after making it audible for a while, he just went back to doing it silently. There was no beginning, there was no end. It was just he shared it for a time and then just went back. Now, the thing about practices like that is there is no time, ever, when you can't do it. There are many times when we don't do it. But when are you not inside your own consciousness? And what's going on in there? I mean, we have all the techniques of affirmations and prayers and mantras, but the end of all of it is to put us in relationship. And what is the most compelling experience we ever have besides fear? It's its opposite, isn't it? Which is love. If you love anything or any person, you can't stop yourself from wanting to be close. Isn't that so? I mean, it's a joke, the passion of new love and the way a mother feels about a child and the child feels about the mother. But we're waiting for that to be given to us effortlessly. But we don't understand that it's also something we choose. In our Festival of Light every week, we have this, a prayer of love went up from earth and God responded. Your chosen people have always been those of every race or nation who with deep love chose thee. And then we have everybody affirm, you gaze at the candle and you say, with all my mind, with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my strength, I choose thy love. I choose only thee. And we do that every week. Why do we do that? Because are we? And that choice isn't just on Sunday, well, now I've done that, now I've been in church, now I've done it. I guess I'm all set till next Sunday. Which is how people think when you imagine that spirituality is automatic. Please the judge and you're safe. But it isn't. It's like, what am I choosing right now? And we have to really deeply feel within ourselves. I may choose many other states of consciousness because I'm habituated to choosing them, and those are the things I've been talking about last night and today. But let's also choose God. Choose Mother. Choose the Comforter. And see, that's where that intimacy becomes so... If you imagine your perfect mother, and you're telling her what's going on, and you're telling her this minute, and then you're telling her the next minute, and then you're telling her the next minute. And if you're with somebody that you love who's very close to you, it's not like you have to articulate everything, but they're there with you, aren't they? We're not alone. If one cultivates that, it's the strangest thing because you're not exactly even aware of it, but you kind of, I don't know how else to say this, you kind of look back at the time when you thought you were by yourself and you really realize that you never were. That somebody was always keeping you company. And I admit that it's helpful to me to have walked with Swami Kriyananda and been with him a lot of times and just felt within myself that completely settled feeling. But even if you haven't had it so accessible to you, we long for it, don't we? We can imagine what that would feel like. I mean, we personify it in the terms of the perfect woman or the perfect man or the baby that we want to have. And what we imagine with that is this extraordinary intimacy. But it comes rarely, and even when it comes, there's always the inevitable distance because unless we're God realized, we can't completely merge. But we can always with God, we can always merge. And that's the antidote, that's Spy Dog. This is what I'm nervous about. Why would I be nervous about it? Divine Mother's here with me. Are you? If so, why am I not feeling your presence? What have I been choosing? Now, it's not, as I was saying this morning, it's not easy, but it's very simple. But that's where all of the devotional side of the path comes from, and that's why. All the chanting, all the opening ourselves to God, all the thinking about Divine Mother in such a specific way, all the beautiful statues of Mary and everything that we have, so that we'll have the nerve to do that. And it's very, very private. And I'll tell you one last thing and then I'll stop. I have a book back there, Loved and Protected, which is stories of miracles and answered prayers, we call it. Swamiji had the idea of writing that book. He felt it would be a very helpful book for people. And he worked on it, he tried to collect stories and worked on it for a while, and it seemed like an odd book for him to write, and apparently he decided it was too. And he showed up at my house one day with this printed out, completely chaotic stack of notes, and he just thrust it in my hands and said, I don't feel like writing this book, I think you should write it. He was trying to get me back into writing because I was nervous. So I took it, and I took it back. And later I said to myself, I would never choose to write this book. there's not one story for me in that book, because I just don't think that way. I don't know how else to say it. It's not that I'm not conscious of God's play in my life, but I don't divide it up. It doesn't cross my mind to think of it like that. But he gave it to me to write, and I was interested in writing it. And I knew from doing the previous book that emails, please send me your stories, don't get you much. People don't like to write, and when they write, they usually write their own story very badly. So you get this really dull skeleton of what the actual event was, that the only way to get people's stories was to interview them. So I set out on this little campaign, and I went to a few of our centers and went to the village, and I started interviewing people. And I sat with people, some I knew, some I didn't know at all, because Ananda's quite large now, and I can type fast enough that I can keep eye contact and still take notes that I can sufficiently read afterwards. So I was able to just sit with people and have them talk to me like this, and just looking in their eyes. And, big, successful-looking people, tiny, worn-out people, young people, old people, just everything, healthy, unhealthy, all of them. Every single one of them had exactly the same look in their eyes. No matter what kind of a face was around those eyes. And those eyes were saying, God is real, and he's taking care of me. Or at least he has, or she has. And I wrote to Swamiji, I said, I'm going to go ahead and write this book and it'll be fun, but thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Because I knew it, but not really. It was so moving just to realize how underneath it all we're exactly the same. Every one of us feels alone and afraid, and God is responding exactly the same to all of us. Whether it was some tiny little event on the beach where one woman in that book, she makes a big heart in the sand and says, I love you, God. And then she spreads her arms out and says, kiss me, Lord, like this. And a rogue wave comes all the way up the beach and takes it off. I mean, on a certain level, trivial, but not for her. Or the story of another man who was an EMT, and he's on this icy road, and he's in the middle of the road, and a car comes shooting around the corner, just coming right at him. His friends are watching from the ambulance out the window. They see the car coming right at him like this. And then all of a sudden, he's 50 feet away. Nothing in between. And then the car, skids off the road and so on, and his friends come rushing out because he had disappeared, which they assumed that he had been annihilated. He's standing over here, he's perfectly fine. It's new snow, there's not a single track. There's no footsteps. He was just in the path of death, and then he wasn't. Just like that. I mean, but what was so fascinating to me is it was the same look in everyone's eyes, which is, I am loved, and I am protected. Why then would we be afraid? You solve the problem at the root. And that's, why Swami was like he was. That's why Master was like he was. And you just have to cultivate that all the time. And that's much more important than anything else. Kriya, etc., enables you to do it because it gives you mastery over your energy. And it allows you to choose. So you see it all works together. But once you get mastery over your energy, you have to make that choice. Otherwise, you're just doing techniques. And then that relationship, that's what saves you in the end. Well, any comments or questions? Yes, Michelle.
I had a recent injury, and I've been asking for healing. God, Master, heal me, nothing. So today in meditation, I said, why don't you heal me? I've been asking you to heal me. And he said, you don't need my healing, you need my love. And then I remembered Swami's quote, the greatest healer of all is love. So I embraced her. I said, I want all of your love. Give me all of your love. And truly, my pain that went down to like 50%.
The Master's healing prayer, the one that we do, says manifest healing presence, is what it says. Just in the presence of God, then everything is fine. Whether you're living, dead, or sick or not, it's that presence that makes all the difference. It's very subtle what he says. Anything else? All right then, great souls. Yes.
What can you do? During yes, you meditate, make everything, but then you meet a person or something, your partner, and you're like a volcano, and your nervous system plays a special place. And in this moment, you are not able to control the energy. What can you tell me to do in such a situation?
You have to realize is it's not a straight line. If you're climbing a mountain, you often go up to the top and then you go down to a valley again, then you go up to the top and then you go down to a valley. But if you keep your attention on where you're heading, even the ups and downs will still be forward. So one of the things you have to realize is, as soon as you realize that you have gotten off center, then you have to do everything that you can to bring yourself back. Whether that's a minute, an hour, a year, a decade, an incarnation. But the moment that we realize that we've lost track of where we're supposed to be, you have to realize that it was just a choice that you made. You haven't become anything other than the perfect expression of spirit who's made some unfortunate decisions. And then you simply have to reverse those. It takes an enormous amount of humility to do that. And humility is the first thing that is required for the devotee. And humility is just stopping whatever's happening. Two friends of ours, a married couple, he was very irritating to her at times because she was a bit hot-headed. They were beginning to have strong words. And he smiled at her and he said, "I'm not caught yet, are you?" Just like that. And it didn't help her. It made her rather even more annoyed. But nonetheless, once you find yourself that you've gone someplace that you don't want to go, see what people do is then they're too embarrassed to stop or to just admit that it's not working. Pause for a minute. My brother has a very highly strung person, and I'm fairly highly strung too. And we would have a way a lot of times of just slipping off. And we actually made an agreement, and the word was skid. We've entered into a skid, and every time our conversation would get rocky, either one of us could just simply declare that we were in a skid, and we're both rather theatrical. And then we'd make a huge point of zipping the lip and not speaking at all. Just, I don't want to go forward anymore once I'm here. And it's a matter of retraining yourself. You know, you're not any kind of person at all. You are just a field of energy, and you've dug certain furrows so the energy is inclined to fall in the same track. But it's surprisingly, any effort to turn it back the other way, you're suddenly cooperating with your higher nature, and then it'll start helping you. So you have to be a little bit detached from your own errors. And part of that is, see, your mother always loves you no matter what. Even the worst murderer has a mother. And so we tend to treat ourselves very badly. But if you have this close relationship with your mother and you suddenly become your own mother, or you see it from your mother's point of view, and then just have the humility to start over. That's really, there is no shortcut on that one. It's a bad habit, and as much energy as you've put into creating it, you're going to have to put commensurate energy in to unraveling it. But the first step is to have the humility to admit when you're wrong. And of course, if your partner or your other people in your life are also volatile, it's not so easy. But there's the karma of the whole thing. Yeah, fair enough? Not an easy question. We create a lot of misery for ourselves, don't we? It's hard on the saints watching us. We just pick up knives and stab ourselves in the heart and wonder why we're bleeding. Help me, sir, help me, I'm bleeding, I'm bleeding. Maybe if you took the knife out of your hand. Knife? Knife? You know, it's just like, we just don't know. We don't see it. But we can. And we must. Because otherwise we suffer. We must.
When I go into my ego, how do I get out? When I notice that,
There's a principle, it's called the first law of holes, Holes. When you find yourself in one, put down your shovel and stop digging. But I mean that seriously. When you find that you're not where you want to be, use your energy to stop doing what you're doing. You know, go, shut your mouth, go into silence. Stop thinking that you're right. If you can walk away, but at the very least, stop making it worse. Do a few rounds of Hong Sa, do a couple of Kriyas. You know, chant for a few minutes, silently or out loud. Say, do the piglet prayer. The piglet prayer is, help, 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 which is a really good prayer. That's the story of Piglet being lost in the fog. And he just doesn't know what else to do, so he just cries, help. That's my favorite prayer. You don't have to be articulate. God reads the heart. Just, I'm in such a mess, Lord, get me out of this. Yeah?
when I encounter an ego in another person, how would you do that?
I said to Swami once about a certain person I had to work with, I said, they're just so impossible. Swami said, well, you know, when I'm with that person, he said, I just don't bother to have a personality. Because they're so overbearing, there's no room for anyone else to have a personality. And I've always just loved that. And I realized that I was always trying to assert myself against what they were doing. And then I finally thought, why? I mean, sometimes you have to if you have a responsibility or something like that. But a great deal of the time, you're just doing it for the same reason they're doing it. You're just competing. Why? It's fun to experiment with that, because oftentimes if you just go into silence, everything sort of begins to straighten itself out. Not always. Sometimes the overbearing person just continues to gallop through. But what does it matter? All right, great souls, that's it for tonight. Thank you all very much.